Inventory costs. In this segment, we will study how to calculate inventory-related costs, which can be affected by logistics decision making. So what are inventories? Now, inventories, there are different types of inventories. Finished product or finished goods inventory is perhaps the most familiar to people because we see it every day or in our everyday life. If you walk into a Walmart or Target retail store, you see product piled up in shelves. That's finished goods inventory. It is usually held in small units, so it's usually held in units that customers are going to buy in. So for example, if you go to Walmart, you might see individual packs of potato chips and you can just buy one pack, right? And so that's finished good inventories held in small units, individual potato chip packs. You may also have finished good inventories multiple places. You may have inventory stored in warehouses, which are also called distribution centers. In warehouses and distribution centers, we often see finished goods and semi-finished inventory. This inventory, even if it's finished good inventory, is slightly different from the inventory you might see at the retail store because it's held in larger units. At least it's at the lowest level, you might have cartons or boxes of product. So you might have a carton with 40 bags of potato chips in it in the warehouse, and you can't open a carton and move individual potato chips. You'll be moving the whole carton. More commonly, you may place 8 or 10 cartons on a pallet and move the whole pallet in the warehouse. So the unit of handling or storage or whatever, it could be pallets, could be cartons or cases, or sometimes even larger units like a whole container full of product. Then when we get to the manufacturing side, we have raw materials inventory, components that we're going to use to make our products, as well as finished goods, because a manufacturing facility, when it finishes production of a unit, that unit may not get shipped out immediately. It may need to be stored in the factory for a few days before it's ready for shipment, because we might want to ship in large batches to save on transportation costs. So in production facilities, you'll often see components, raw materials, as well as semi-finished goods inventory and finished goods inventory. Yeah. Then during transit or transportation, because it may take days or weeks to go from the production plant to a distribution center, especially in global supply chains where you're moving across oceans, across countries. So we may have inventory in transit, which may be in truckload sizes, 5 truckloads of product being sent somewhere, or maybe in containers, 1 or 2 or 3 containers being sent. Sometimes we even send partial containers, so we don't fill up a container with one product, and so that's also possible. Then another type of inventory is what's called work in process inventory. This is inventory which is being worked on. So you may have 10 steps in your production process. Between step 1 and step 2, there may be some products waiting for step 2 to work on them. Similarly, between step 2 and step 3, you may have some products lying around. And so inventory which is currently being worked on by equipment or people, as well as inventory between manufacturing or processing steps waiting for the next step to happen, is work in process inventory. Inventory is basically anything in the supply chain which is waiting to be processed or waiting for an event. So finished goods inventory is often waiting for an event, which is sales. So sales happens and we send the finished goods inventory or give it to the customer. In manufacturing, you may have product waiting for the next step or some event to happen when it's going to get processed. So anything that is waiting and that is going to be used to produce the goods and services that your company produces. So anything that is going to be used to produce goods and services that the company produces, and that thing is waiting right now for some event or processing to happen, is inventory. Where are inventories? Inventories are everywhere in the supply chain. So in this picture, we have an example supply chain where we have material sources on the left. These would be our raw materials and component suppliers. Okay. So they obviously carry some inventory because when we place an order with them, they have certain number of days to ship out the order, so they may have some finished goods inventory, or inventory that is finished goods inventory because of prior orders which are going to be shipped soon. Okay, then the inventory from those places is going to come to our production facility. Okay, it may come by rail, it may come by truck, it may come by an ocean ship, right, or a combination of these things, or air, right. During the transit, it's still inventory. So you may have inventory in transit at any time. Then in the production facility, you have, the raw materials or component inventory that you got from the suppliers. Then you have work in process inventory, or WIP, okay, that is being processed on. And then you may have finished goods inventory. The finished goods inventory will get sent to warehouse or distribution centers. It may be sent by a truck or air or rail or any of the modes of transportation. Okay. From these warehouses, if a customer orders online, we may ship product directly to the customer's home. And in this case, beyond this point, it's no longer inventory because the customer owns the good, the products. Okay, so when a customer buys something and the customer owns it, it depends on what the terms of sales are. If we own the product till the customer's doorstep, which is often the case, then this inventory in transit till it gets to the customer's doorstep, and then the customer owns it and it's no longer inventory. It goes out of our system. Sometimes the terms of sales are such that when we ship it out by UPS or FedEx, it's no longer our property, it's the customer's property as soon as it leaves our doors. So then it's no longer in transit inventory for us, even though UPS or FedEx is carrying it in a truck. It's in transit or pipeline inventory for the customer. So at some point, the inventory leaves the system because we no longer own it and it's no longer our concern or our inventory. Then we may have product shipped from the distribution center to retail stores, and in retail stores it's still our inventory if they're our stores. And sometimes we even have inventory in the customer's homes. Okay, how's that possible? If a product has reached the customer's home, how could it be our inventory? Well, think about a company such as an internet company where the customers rent or borrow the modem or router or such equipment to have the internet or Wi-Fi in their homes. Often with cable companies or internet companies, you have an option of either purchasing the router or borrowing it or renting it from that company. So if as a customer I've rented the cable modem from the internet provider company, then the provider company still owns that cable modem. So it's going to be part of that company's inventory, but it's lying in my home. Same thing if you rent a car from a rental car company, the car may be parked in your home or in front of the hotel you're staying at, but it's still the property of the rental car, and on their books is still their inventory, okay, or their asset. So there are times when you can have and sometimes you have these lending businesses, obviously. So Netflix still you can borrow DVDs from, not Netflix, sorry, you can still borrow DVDs from some lending providers of video content. And once you borrow a DVD, it's in your home, but it's the inventory of that company. So why do we have inventories in the first place? Because they occupy space, we have to spend money to transport them and so forth. Well, the number one reason why we have inventories is that they improve customer service. Okay. And this is really key, because if customer service falls below acceptable levels, then we will lose customers. So inventories are important to make sales. Without inventories, we may not be able to maintain our current level of sales. Imagine a world where if you go to buy something, the retailer or the seller tells you, hey, great, you want to buy this thing, place the order and pay me the money, and then I'm going to send an order to the manufacturer who's going to produce the item for you. When the order gets to the manufacturer, he's going to place an order with his or her suppliers to buy the raw material and components necessary. Okay, so first the raw materials will flow to the manufacturer. He will produce the item for you, then the item will get shipped to the retailer or to the customer's home. And so the time between placing the order and receiving the item may be weeks or months. Okay? If everything you wanted to buy, it took 6 weeks or 2 months for it to get to you, imagine how difficult life would be. Imagine going to a store for milk and the store telling you, we have called the farmer, he's going to milk his cows tomorrow, and then the day after tomorrow you can come pick up the milk. Okay, so life would be very, very difficult. So customers like low order cycle time. Okay, order cycle time is the time between placing the order and receiving the goods or service. Okay, so customers love this time to be small, because once they pay for something, they want that thing right away. Okay, that B/W is my notation for between. Okay. And so inventories allow us to reduce the order cycle time for the customer, because if we have finished goods inventory, as soon as the customer places the order, we can say, hey, here is the product you ordered. Another reason to have inventories is to have high product availability, which means how many or what percentage of products that you sell are available for sale at a given time. Imagine going to a store and 2 out of 10 things you wanted to buy are out of stock. Well, you may not be very happy, because now maybe you have to travel to another store to buy those 2 things. So stores or retail outlets or businesses which carry the full range they offer in inventory have high product availability. No matter what you want to buy, it is available in stock. You can get it right away. So inventories allow us to improve product availability. They allow us to reduce order cycle time for customers. And so in doing so, they improve customer service. Yes, the second most important reason to have inventories is from the cost perspective, which is that inventories can actually reduce production, transportation, and purchasing costs because of economies of scale. Okay, it's often not very viable to produce product in single units, because if you have to set up the equipment, you have to clean the equipment, service the equipment, and you run the equipment to produce just one unit and you shut it down. There's a lot of cost to start up and shut down, and so it's not worth it to start up the equipment and produce only one or a few units. So you often, when everything is set up or the assembly line is set up for a particular product, you want to produce several or hundreds of units of that product. So obviously, if you're going to produce hundreds or thousands or several units of a product, each time you fire up the production process, you're going to have some inventory because the demand may not be for that many units. So we can have long production runs to reduce production costs. Then when we are transporting things, we can transport things in larger batch sizes, have consolidated shipments, which means full truckload shipments and so forth, which can reduce our transportation expense. Then sometimes suppliers will charge a lower price if we place a bigger order with them. So to benefit for those discounts, sometimes we buy more than what we need for right now, and then the remaining extra stuff stays as inventory. Just imagine you go and something that you like is on sale. Let's say maybe butter is on sale or something, and so you say, okay, this week I only need a little bit amount of butter, but I'm gonna buy the next 4 weeks worth of my butter consumption because it's on sale. I can save some money and I can just put it in the fridge and store it for the next 4 weeks. So that's the same thing that happens with companies when they want to use quantity discounts at purchase to reduce their purchasing expense, and that leads to inventories. The third most important reason to have inventories is as a hedge or buffer against various types of uncertainties. Okay, there could be uncertainty in demand. You don't know how high the demand is going to be, so you have to have inventory depending on your expectations of demand. Maybe the supply is variable and the manager is afraid that the supply may be too short next month and for a key component, so that company may buy more components than it needs right now because they expect in near future the supply to be tight. Okay? And so forth. All types of uncertainties or variabilities, we can hedge or buffer against them using inventory. Okay? Then a related point is that these uncertainties that we just talked about, demand, supply, lead time, price uncertainty, they're more a feature of day-to-day business. Every year, every month, every quarter, you see these movements and these uncertainties and variability. But then there are events which happen maybe once in 10 years or once in a lifetime or once every few years, which are unforeseen events like disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, storms, forest fires. These sorts of events which can disrupt the supply chain, and sometimes we keep inventory so that if such an event happens, we don't have to shut down our business. We still have inventory to sell or to work on and to process. Types of inventory. So earlier we talked about finished goods inventory, work in process inventory, raw materials inventory. That is one way to look at different types of inventories. A more useful way from a costing perspective is to look at inventory based on function, on why we have that inventory. Okay. So pipeline inventories are inventories in transit. It's products, raw materials, goods that are moving from one point to the other. They're on a truck or an airplane or a ship. And so these inventories exist because of distances between different facilities and points at which the processing or some event has to happen. Okay. Then speculative inventories are inventories purchased in anticipation that the price or demand is going to increase or decrease. It's not about variability that you see on a day-to-day basis. It's like, okay, maybe the steel prices are going to go through the roof because we're going to place we're gonna have some event happen on the global level, which might or might not happen, and so we buy a lot of steel now to protect ourselves against the price increase. And if the price increase does not happen, then we have that inventory which will use up over time. But if the price increase does happen, we'll save a lot of money. So those are called speculative inventories. Okay. Then we have an inventory which is sometimes called regular inventory, but the technical name is cycle inventory. Okay. These inventories are kept to meet normal operating needs, and the reason we keep them is because we often do things in batches. So economies of scale. To benefit from economies of scale, we might order a truckload of some component from the supplier instead of ordering just one box which we need today or tomorrow or this week. Okay, so because we order in large batches, we might manufacture in some batch sizes, we might ship in batch sizes. This leads to using those batches to benefit from economies of scale, leads to cycle inventory. The reason it's called cycle is because this inventory goes through a cycle. Once you receive a new batch, you have lots of inventory. Then as you use it up, the inventory goes down almost to zero, and then you get a new batch. So it keeps going up and down as you receive batches. Whenever you receive a batch, inventory goes up. Then as you process it, based on your processing rate, it keeps going down. So because of that up and down motion of the inventory level is called cycle inventory. It cycles between maximum and minimum values. Then we have safety stock or safety inventory, which is kept to deal with variation in demand and lead time, which are variation we see on a daily basis. This is not variation because, a once in a lifetime storm hit us. This is variation which you see on a more daily, weekly, monthly basis in demand and lead time and so forth. So because when you have variability, you don't know how much the lead time will be, how much the demand will be. We have to keep some extra inventory to buffer against that variability. Okay. And then we may have inventory that we probably want to get rid of but haven't done yet. It's called obsolete or dead stock. So it could be expired foods or medicines or out of date products. So let's say we launch a new product and then our old product, do we still have some finished goods inventory left? Right? It could be damaged goods, it could be obsolete goods. If this is not cleaned out periodically, they can take up a lot of space in warehouses and distribution centers because nobody's interested in it. We can't sell it for full price anyway. So often managers are not interested in it. The sales staff is not interested in it. So it just kind of gets ignored and keeps piling up in various corners in the warehouse. So it's also important to actually get rid of this because the cost can over time add up. What are the relevant inventory costs that we are actually going to compute that can be affected by our logistics decisions? The first type of inventory cost is called carrying costs. As the name suggests, carrying costs are costs that are incurred to hold the inventory over time, to store it over time. Okay? This includes money tied up. So if I buy $1 million worth of product as inventory, then that $1 million is tied up in inventory. If I had not bought that inventory, I could have invested that $1 million in short-term securities or cash equivalents, or just put them in a savings account and earned some interest, right? So one part of carrying costs comes because of the cost of money based on the interest rates or the cost of capital for the company. And that makes a part of carrying cost. It's not all of carrying cost. Other components of carrying costs come from costs of insurance. So you may have to insure product in a warehouse or in a retail store against fire or something like that. There's obsolescence cost. Whenever you hold inventory over time, some of the product could expire. So if we know that 0.01% of the product is going to expire every month or whatever, we have to factor that cost into the cost of holding inventory. Then you have costs associated with renting space to actually put that stuff somewhere, renting or owning space. So you might rent a warehouse or you might own a warehouse. Then you may have to, depending on the product, have some temperature control in wherever you're holding that product. Some product cannot be stored below or above a certain temperature, right? So all those costs that are associated with holding inventory over time are carrying costs. Usually they're expressed as a percentage of the value of inventory, and the average is about 20 to 25%. So if you are holding $1 million worth of inventory for a whole year, then 20% of 1 million might be how much money you have to spend to hold $1 million worth of inventory for 1 year. Okay, sometimes it's less, so it could be as low as 10% or 8%. Sometimes it's much higher, it could be as high as 40%. So we don't want to hold inventory for too long, because the longer we hold inventory, the carrying cost keeps accumulating. Okay. Ordering costs are costs associated to order something from a supplier or a provider, something like components or raw materials that we need. Okay. Whenever we prepare an order, there's a cost to prepare the order, because some employee has to work on making sure the purchase order is correct. Then there might be an order transmission cost, although with electronic ordering this is minimal. And then there might be a cost of using the banks. Sometimes we have to issue a letter of credit when we place an order. So there might be financial or banking transaction costs associated with placing an order with a supplier. Now, sometimes the order is placed with another unit in the same company. So, a warehouse manager might place an order with the production factory for a certain good. When that order is placed, the production factory is in the same company, so it's not ordering from a supplier, so you may not have to create a purchase order, although you may have to create some other sort of documentation within the company, so there might be cost of that. But then the production facility will have to set up the equipment to produce that product, and there might be a setup or a production ramping up cost. And that will be ordering cost as well, because we placed the order, and because of that order the setup had to be done. Okay. If an order has to be inspected upon arrival, that cost is also often added to the ordering costs. The key difference between ordering costs and carrying cost is that ordering costs are proportional to number of orders. Okay, if I place only 4 huge orders in a year, my ordering cost is only going to be 4 times the cost of each order, even though each order is for thousands of pieces. Okay, carrying costs are proportional to number of units or quantity in terms of kilograms or volume, something like that. So this goes up as inventory quantity goes up. Even if I place just one order, it doesn't matter how many orders there are. What matters is how many units or quantity of product I have. Okay. Whereas ordering cost is, it doesn't matter how many units you have. What matters is how many orders you place. So small frequent orders are going to have high ordering cost, and large infrequent orders tend to have smaller ordering costs because you place fewer orders. Okay, whenever a customer asks to buy something and we don't have the product in stock, we have what's called an out of stock cost. Okay, Because when something is out of stock, one of two things will happen. Either we'll lose the sale, the customer will say, okay, I'll go buy it from somebody else. Or the customer will say, okay, I will wait. That's called a back order because the customer has placed the order today, but he cannot receive the goods, so he's waiting. It's kind of like taking a rain check. Sometimes you go to buy something in a store, it's on sale, they don't have it, but they take your information down and say when we're going to expedite the order for you, or get it soon, and then we'll call you and then you can come and pick it up. Okay, so lost sales obviously are a cost because you lost that customer, you lost the profit on that sale. So there's immediate loss to profits, and also there could be loss of goodwill. Each time you send a customer away, that maybe 1 out of 100 of those customers is never going to come back to you because of the bad experience. So you're going to lose some customers, and there's some cost to be factored in for that. When we place back orders, often back orders are expedited, so there could be expediting costs, cost to ship them faster or produce them faster, and then there's cost to actually handle the paperwork associated with the back order. Okay. So this may look a little bit weird on first glance. Why are these part of inventory costs? Well, because our inventory policy is going to determine how often out of stock type of situation happens. If we carry a lot of inventory, we won't have a lot of out of stock costs. But carrying a lot of inventory, we'll have a lot of carrying cost. On the other hand, if we carry little inventory, we'll save on carrying cost. But because we carry little inventory, frequently we'll have this out of stock situation where we'll have a lost sales or back ordering cost. So you can see how you can easily minimize one part of the cost, but then drive up the other part of the costs. Okay. And then we have pipeline inventory costs. These are just kind of like carrying costs. But the fact is that the inventory is in transit, so it's kind of like carrying costs. It's kind of the cost of owning inventory which is in transit. Well, why do we have a cost of that? Well, first we have money tied up in the inventory, so we have financed that inventory. We have spent the money instead of having it in a savings account or something which earns interest. Second of all, often we have to insure that inventory, especially if it's something valuable. And so even though we are not holding them in our warehouse, they are on a truck or a ship somewhere, we still have some costs associated with in-transit inventory. So then the total inventory costs, and usually we calculate them in dollars per year. Okay, what's the inventory cost in dollars per year? Okay. So the total inventory cost has 4 components. Number one, you have carrying costs. So we calculate them. Then you add to that the ordering cost. Then you add to that the expected out of cost stocks. How often you expect out of stock situation to happen. What is the cost of that? And then you add to that the pipeline inventory costs, because any inventory that you get is going to be in transit for a certain amount of time, and it's going to be pipeline inventory for a certain amount of time. When we add these 4 costs, we get the total inventory costs in dollars per year. And this is what we'll be computing, and as we take different decisions, we can see whether the total cost goes up or down based on our decisions. Okay, because our decisions may impact these 4 components in different ways, and we'll do examples and see how that happens. Okay, so this is the computation that we need to learn, how to calculate total inventory cost by calculating these 4 components and adding them up. Let's study how to calculate the first component of total inventory costs, which is called carrying costs. To calculate carrying costs, we need to understand the ordering cycle and how does cycle stock move up and down. So we will start off with that. So this diagram explains what happens to inventory, and it's called the order cycle for inventory. Okay, so let's say this is inventory lying in our retail store Or if you're an online retailer, this like an Amazon, this could be inventory in Amazon's distribution center. Then some nice customers come and they buy stuff from us. So when they buy stuff, we give them the product or ship it to their home, and then based on how much product is bought per day or per week, we ship out the small d units per time period. Small d is often the demand per day. D is for demand, and so small d units per day get shipped out of this inventory that we carry. This is finished goods inventory that we carry. Okay, finished goods inventory. So if today in the morning I had 100 units and 10 units got sold today, at the end of the day I'll be left with only 90 units. So you can see if you stand here, okay, so if somebody stands here and they look at this pile of inventory, they will see the pile decrease over time. Okay, and the rate of decrease is the small d, how many units you sell per day. So if we sell 20 per day, the pile will decrease faster, versus if we only sell 5 per day, then the pile will decrease slower. Okay, so that's the first thing we need to understand. When we have inventory of finished goods from which we sell stuff, that inventory is going to decrease at d units per time period. Okay, then we may have some guy who's managing the inventory. He is a logistics analyst or a manager or inventory analyst, and when he sees this pile shrink, it becomes too small, he or she will place an order with the supplier and say, hey, my inventory is getting low, can you send me some more product? Now this could be the manufacturer, and the manufacturer could be the same company. So if this is inventory in an Apple warehouse or store, this could be the Apple manufacturing unit or facility or whatever. Okay, so you will place an order either with our own manufacturing unit or with a supplier, depending on if we buy the product from a supplier or if we make it ourselves. Okay. When this order goes, this order is going to be for some quantity, capital Q. That's the ordering batch size. We place orders not for 1 unit at a time, but we actually place orders for Q units at a time. When we place that order, Q units will get shipped to us, and on the way to us they will be pipeline inventory, also called in-transit inventory. Then at some whatever the lead time is to get the inventory from the supplier, after that lead time elapses, Q units will arrive and they will make this pile go up by Q units. So notice if you stand and look at this pile of goods, it will have jumps. Whenever inventory arrives, it will jump up by Q units, and then on a day-to-day basis, it will drop by small d units every day. So it will go up and down. Okay. Every certain number of days, approximately on average, every certain number of days, Q units will arrive and the inventory will jump up again. Okay, that the time between these jumps or receiving these Q units is called time between orders. So if the annual demand is capital D, which is just going to be small d multiplied by the number of days we are open for sales. Let's say we are open every single day, then it's 365 days. So small d is demand per day multiplied by 365 days, we get annual demand. If we are only open for 350 days, then we multiply by 350 days. Okay, so this is number of days we are open for business, for sales. So capital D, so the time between orders is going to be Q, the ordering batch size, divided by capital D, the demand per year, and that's going to be time between order in years. So often you might see a small number for T, like 0.1 years. You can often translate it into weeks or days because it's easier to talk about 2 weeks or 20 days than to talk about 0.09 years. And so if you calculate it, you might get a number. You'll get a number in years, then you can just multiply it by 12 to get number of months, or multiply it by 52 to get number of weeks, because there are 52 weeks in a year and so forth. Okay, so this is called the order cycle for the inventory. Now let's illustrate what happens to that pile of inventory, and we're going to assume a simple situation where the demand is fixed, which means the demand does not change. It's constant demand. There's no randomness. Okay, so our sales are 1 unit per day. Every day we just sell 1 unit. Okay, so let's say on day 1 we have 6 pieces of inventory. Okay, at the beginning of day 1. Now at the end of day 1, which is, you can think of it like the beginning of day 2, we'll have 5 units left over because that 1 unit has been sold. Right? So the customer came in, took away 1 unit. Okay? Then after another day passes, we'll have another unit missing because it's sold. That will be gone. So you can see our pile of inventory is decreasing day by day. Okay. Now, once we run out of stock on day 6, that is not the time to place the order, because if we place the order at the end of day 6 or beginning of day 7, the order is not going to arrive instantaneously. The supplier or the factory is going to take some time to send us the order. Okay. And so if we order on day 6 or 7, we're going to be too late. We're going to have some days with 0 inventory, and then customers are going to come and we're going to have nothing to sell to them. So how much in advance should we order? Well, let's say our lead time is 3 days. So when you place an order with the supplier may take 1 day to load the truck, and then the truck travels for 2 days to your warehouse or your retail store or whatever. So after 3 days, you actually receive product. If that is the case, then you must order 3 days in advance of running out of stock. So in the current scenario, we run out of stock at the end of day 6 or the beginning of day 7. So 3 days before beginning of day 7 is beginning of day 4. So at the beginning of day 4, when we have 3 pieces left to last us for 3 days, we're going to place an order, and then if we do that, the order should arrive on day 7. So on day 7, we'll receive Q units. In this case, Q is 6. So 6 units arrive on day 7. Okay. So notice, if you look at the quantity of inventory, we had 6 pieces, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, then 6 again. So it goes down from 6, the inventory, and then it jumps back up to 6. Because on day 7 you have 6. Then it goes down again. Okay. So if I plot how much inventory I have on hand over time, okay, or days, you'll see that I have 6 pieces, which is my Q, my ordering batch size. Okay, on day 6 I get to 0 inventory, and then beginning of day 7 I get my order, I'm back to 6. And so I have this, what's sometimes called a sawtooth pattern of cycle inventory. Okay, this is kind of a stylized example because you're not going to sell 1 unit every single day. You might sell 2 units on some day, 1 unit on some day, 3 units on some days. There's some randomness, but that just makes the graph a little bit more wiggly, but you still see this kind of sawtooth type of shape. This is the reason this inventory is called cycle inventory, because it goes up and down. So now we know why it's going up and down. It goes down because sales happen, and after a certain time period it goes up because we place a replenishment order to replenish our stocks. So in the real world, demand is not fixed. So the small d, the demand per day, is going to be the average demand per day. Okay, on average, I sell 10 units per day. Some days I may sell only 5, some days I may sell 20, right? So it's going to vary, but small is going to be just the average. Okay. The lead time also may not be constant. In busy season, the supplier might be too busy, and he or she might take more than 3 days to fulfill the order, right? And so L, the lead time, might just represent the usually represents the average lead time. If they say the L is 10, that means 10 days. On average, it takes us 10 days. It might take more or less on a specific order. If we order assuming fixed demand, okay, then we know we have to order in advance of running out of stock. We don't wait to run out of stock, because then it will take a few days to get the stock and we'll have zero inventory for a few days. So the ordering point, when do we order? We order when we have enough stock left for L days to last the lead time, because we need D units a day on average. D times L is how many units we should have in stock when we should place the next order. So remember, in the previous example, small d was 1, lead time L was 3 days. So 3 times 1, we placed the order when we had 3 units in stock. Now, if demand is fixed, there's no variability, lead time is fixed, there is no variability, then this would work fine. You would always place a reorder or a replenishment order when you have D multiplied by L units left in stock, and then after L days you will eat through that stock, and then the new shipment would arrive, and then you'll be fine again. Okay, but if D is only the average demand and L is the average lead time, then sometimes you may run out of stock while you're still waiting for the order to arrive. And so to avoid running out of stock during the lead time for the order, we often add some extra stock, which is called safety stock. Okay. So instead of ordering when D times L units remain, we place an order when D times L plus safety stock units remain. And so we eat through this part of the inventory before the next order arrives, but we might eat through more than that, because L is longer than the lead time turns out to be longer, or the demand turns out to be higher. So then we have some safety stock to take us through that extra demand or extra lead time. Okay. So remember, in the previous example with the fixed demand and fixed lead time, this is how our inventory looked over time. Okay. When we add safety stock, we move this whole graph up by how much safety stock we add. So let's say this is 10 units or however many units of safety stock, then on average, this is how our inventory will move up and down. Although this is a stylized example, in real life, sometimes your inventory will go below this level and eat through the safety stock. But it will not hit zero, which is the key point, because when inventory hits zero, you stop selling. You can't sell anymore. You don't want that to happen. Okay. So if you have too high demand, we might go eat into our safety stock, and then we order again, and then our stock goes up again. So you'll often see us eating into the safety stock, but very rarely will we hit zero inventory, because the safety stock would be helping us out. So what's the average level of inventory? If we have no safety stock, only we are ordering batches of size Q. So in the simple example, the maximum inventory is Q, the minimum inventory is 0, so the average inventory is simply Q over 2. When we add safety stock, because on average safety stock does not go up and down, it just stays constant, then our average inventory will be Q over 2, our cycle stock, which goes up and down, the average level being Q over 2 units, plus the safety stock. that will be what's called the average inventory level. Now, knowing the average inventory level is important because that's going to drive our carrying cost, because on average you carry that much inventory. So how do we calculate carrying cost? The formula is relatively straightforward. We know, or we compute, first of all, the holding cost per dollar of inventory per year. Okay, so H, let's say H is 20 cents on a dollar, or 20%. That's going to be $0.2 that we spend per dollar of inventory per year. So if I have $1 in inventory, okay, $1 of goods, inventory goods, and I hold them for 1 year, then I'll need to spend $0.2 to hold $1 of inventory for 1 year. Okay, so H is always dollars per dollar per year. Okay. Okay, so we multiply H by C. C is the cost, the landed cost of inventory, which is how much money have I paid to get the inventory to my facility. This includes the purchase cost and the transportation cost. All of that is added into landed cost. Okay, um, and so that is C. Because C is the price, you can say, or the worth of the inventory that I'm holding. Okay, so remember, if we hold $1, we pay 20 cents. So C tells us how many dollars we are holding for 1 unit. And then how many units am I holding is given by average inventory level, AIL. So carrying cost in dollars per year, okay, carrying cost in dollars per year is simply H multiplied by C multiplied by average inventory level. Okay. In real life, we have to compute H. Often we get help of accountants to help us with determining what H is, because we ask the accountant, if I store $1 of inventory for 1 year, how much do I spend to store it? You know, what is the storage cost, other costs, the financing cost, whatnot. And so we can find out H. And then C, we know from the purchase price and the transportation expense and whatnot, is the landed cost of the item in our facility where we are holding the inventory. So if I have 1 unit of inventory in my warehouse, C is how much money I spent to get that 1 unit of inventory in the warehouse. And then AIL is how many units on average I have in my warehouse. So H times C times AIL gives me the average carrying cost of inventory in dollars per year. Let's do an example. Okay, let's say the average level of inventory of bread at a bakery is 150 loaves. So on average, that bakery carries 150 loaves of bread. The purchase cost of bread is $2. This is basically the cost to purchase um, the materials, and then to transport the materials, and then actually make the bread. So for simplicity, I'm using purchase cost, but as we go forward, we'll start using landed cost, which is more accurate, which is all the money paid to get inventory at that place in that state. Okay, so let's just change it to landed cost. The landed cost of bread is $2, and the holding cost is 40%. Okay, another way to say this is that the holding cost is $0.4 if $1 of inventory is kept for 1 year. Okay, so what is the annual carrying cost of inventory? So that's going to be H, which is 40%, or 0.4. Remember, 40% means 40 out of 100, which is 0.4. Okay, so if it's 40%, don't multiply by 40, divide 40 by 100, multiply by 0.4. So 0.4 multiplied by 2, 2 multiplied by 150 becomes 0.4 multiplied by 300, which becomes $120 per year. Okay, so 150 loaves of bread, which cost $2 each, is $300 in inventory, and then the carrying cost per dollar is 0.4. So 0.4 times 300 gives us $120 per year of annual carrying cost. In the previous example, the average inventory level was given in the question. However, that is not usually the case. A first step in calculating inventory carrying costs is often to calculate the average inventory level. The formula for average inventory level has two parts. The first part is Q over 2, and this is the average cycle stock. Cycle stock exists because we order in batches. So Q is the ordering quantity, size of the order batch, that arrives at the location at which we are calculating the inventory carrying costs. Okay, so imagine, let's say you're in a warehouse, you order batches of 500 units from the supplier. So 500 units arrive at a time to the warehouse of that product. So Q would be 500, and the average cycle stock would be Q over 2. Now, to calculate the average inventory level, we have to add to Q over 2 the safety stock at that location. Okay, and so we need to figure out how to calculate that safety stock, because once we calculate safety stock, we can calculate average inventory level. Once we have average inventory level, we can go ahead and calculate the inventory carrying cost. Safety stock depends on two things: the cycle service level, which is sometimes just simply referred to as the service level, and variability in demand during lead time. We'll use the shorthand DDLT to refer to demand during lead time. Recall that lead time is the time between placing an order with the supplier and receiving that order. Okay? So if you order 500 units of a particular product today, how many days would it take to receive that order? That's the lead time. And during this time period, when you've placed the order and when you receive the order, the time between that, there's going to be some demand from your customers, and so that demand is demand during lead time. Now, the purpose of safety stock is to make sure that we don't run out of stock during lead time. So obviously, it is going to depend on demand during lead time, or more precisely, the variability in demand during lead time. Service level is the probability of not running out of stock during the ordering cycle. In other words, service level or cycle service level is the probability that the safety stock will be sufficient against demand and lead time uncertainty. Sometimes cycle service level is set by management based on the risk tolerance or risk preference. So for some products we might have a risk tolerance, or rather low risk tolerance, and we might say, okay, the service level should be 99%. 99% of the time we should not run out of stock before the new shipment arrives from the supplier. For some other products, maybe which are not as profitable to sell, we may set a lower service level. We might say these products are not that profitable, so let's just say 90% of the time we don't want them to be out of stock. So the cycle service level is 90% or 0.9. Okay? So the management might set the cycle service level based on their risk tolerance or preference. Another way to set the cycle service level is to use mathematics or modeling to figure out what service level gives us the lowest costs. Okay? So when we calculate that, okay, for these products, service level or cycle service level of 92% minimizes our cost, so that's what we're going to go with, and so forth. For our purposes, the cycle service level will always be provided, so you don't have to worry about calculating it or figuring it out. Now the other factor which affects the safety stock is variability in demand during lead time. That variability comes from two sources. One, the demand can change from day to day, so during the lead time the demand is going to be changing or varying, right? So every day you're not going to see the exact same demand. And second, the lead time itself may vary. So we might say on average it takes 10 days for us to receive the products. If anybody has done online shopping, they would recognize this. Sometimes when you place an order, the goods you have ordered arrive in 2 days, sometimes they may arrive in 3 days, sometimes they may arrive in only 1 day, and so forth. So the time it takes to receive an order has some variability, right? So the lead time itself may have some variabilities. It may not be a constant fixed value. It may change from time to time. Now, because these two factors lead to or drive safety stock, when both of these factors are zero, safety stock will be zero. So if demand is constant, there is no variability. The cycle service level is never going to be zero. So this can never be zero, okay? Because zero would mean that we are always want to be out of stock. Well, we don't always want to be out of stock. So that can never be zeros. The second factor, which is variability in demand during lead time, that variability is due to either variability in demand or variability in lead time. When both these variabilities are zero, then safety stock is zero because there is no variability to hedge or buffer against. So if the demand is constant, which means the standard deviation of demand or the variance of demand is zero, there's no variability. And if the lead time is also constant, then the variance in the lead time is also zero. So if both of these variabilities are zero, then we don't need any safety stock. Then the safety stock would be zero as well. To explain the concept of variability in demand during lead time, let's look at this graphical representation. Okay. So this shows an example of an order which was placed with the supplier, and it took 9 days for the order to arrive. During each of those 9 days, the demand on each day was this many thousands of units. Okay. So we can see that from day to day, the demand varies. Some days have higher demand, some days have lower demand. Also, on this order, the lead time was 9 days, but that is not a constant. Sometimes it could be 7 days only, sometimes it may take 11 days, right? So there's variability along the x-axis, how many days it takes to get the order, or there could be, and there could be variability on the y-axis, how much demand there is on each of the individual days, right? And then the total demand during lead time would be this number plus this number plus this number plus this number plus this number. So if I call this D1 for demand on day 1, this is D2, D3, and so forth. So then the demand during lead time is the sum of those demands. Okay, but how many demands do I add up? Do I add up till D9? Do I add up till D10? Do I add up till D11? That could be variable because the lead time could be variable. Okay, so the variability in demand, the variability in the total demand during lead time comes from variability over day-to-day demand, as well as variability in the length of the lead time. So we can look at, because demand during lead time, the total demand during lead time is variable, it is going to vary, we can look at its probability distribution. Okay. Now if the lead time is L days, on average, if that's the average lead time, and demand during one day is small d, demand per day on average, if that's the average daily demand, then the average demand during lead time is simply going to be the average daily demand multiplied by the average lead time. Okay. So we can easily find the average demand during lead time by doing this. Now, if the lead time was constant, then the L, instead of being the average lead time, would just be that fixed lead time. Or if the demand per day was fixed, for some reason, let's say we did not have any variability in daily demand, then the small d would be the fixed number, the actual daily demand, and not the average daily demand. Okay. So that's going to be our average of the distribution. Now from the central limit theorem, because we're adding up demand of several days to get the demand during lead time, we know that the demand during lead time is going to be normally distributed. So this is a normal distribution. Okay. Okay. The second thing, two numbers describe a normal distribution, the mean and the standard deviation. Okay. So we already figured out what the mean is. Now we need to figure out what the standard deviation of this distribution is. And I'm going to call that SDL, S for standard deviation, DL for the demand during lead time. Okay, so SDL is the standard deviation of demand during lead time, DDLT. Okay, and the average of DDLT is DL, D multiplied by L. Okay. Let's assume for a moment that we know the standard deviation SDL. Okay. So if I know the standard deviation SDL, and obviously I know the average demand during lead time, then I can figure out a point here, okay, such that the probability that, let me call this point S. Let me just call this point A for now. Okay. So I can figure out what the point A should be, so that the probability that demand during lead time exceeds A is as small as I want it to be. Okay. Now remember, the service level or cycle service level is the probability that demand during lead time will be less, would not cause a stock out, would be covered by a safety stock. So this right here, the distance between the mean and point A, this is the amount of safety stock I will keep. Okay. And so if the cycle service level is 95%, I can choose point A so that the probability of being to the right of point A somewhere here is only 5% or 0.05. Okay. If I knew SDL, how do I pick point A? Well, we need to convert the 95% into a z-score, because every probability to the left of a point. So the probability to the left of A, this probability here, probability of being below A is 0.95. If we go to the z-score from the z table or use Excel to calculate it, it would tell us how many standard deviations you have to be above the mean so that the probability of being less than that point A is 0.95. Okay, so because I don't expect you to use statistical tables because we have Excel, you can just plug in this formula into Excel, equals norm.s.inv, and give it the cycle service level, which is 0.95. And you will find that the z-score will turn out to 1.645, or approximately we can just say 1.65. Okay, so what that means is I need to be 1.65 standard deviations to the right of the mean at this point here, and if I am here, then 95% of the time my demand will be less than point A. Okay, now the total value of A is not my safety stock. Okay, because let's say you know, just to illustrate, let's say the average lead time is 100. So small d multiplied by L is 100. That's the mean. And when I calculate A, this point here, I have to go 1.65 standard deviations to the right of the mean. So let's say I do that, okay, and let's say my standard deviation is 10. Okay, so then 1.65 multiplied by 10 would give me 16.5. So I will have this point A would be 100 plus 16.5. It will be 116.5. Okay, so notice my safety stock is not 116.5. My safety stock is just Z times SDL, which is 16.5. Because that's how much above the mean I have to go. Okay, and the reason my safety stock is only 16.5 is that this 100, the average, is taken care of by ordering in advance. If you remember the earlier example, we place an order not when our inventory hits 0, but when our inventory hits a reorder point, which is the expected demand during lead time. When you expect to sell 100 units during lead time, you're going to place the order when you still have 100 units in stock from cycle stock. You're going to place the order early. So if the demand is always exactly 100, there is no variability. Saying there is no variability is saying SDL is 0. Okay, if SDL is 0, then Z times SDL is 0, so your safety stock is 0. You don't need any safety stock, even though there's still an demand during lead time. You're still going to sell 100 units during lead time. We don't use safety stock to take care of those 100 because we can just order before we run out of stock. We can order when we have 100 units in stock, we place the order, and then the next order from the supplier arrives just as we are using up those 100 units from stock. Okay. Safety stock is only to take care of the variability in demand during lead time. It's not there to take care of the average demand during lead time, because average demand during lead time can be taken care of just by ordering before you run out of inventory. Okay, you should never aim to order when you're at 0 stock. You always order when you have average demand during lead time level of stock. Okay, so that on average you just use up that stock that is remaining during the lead time. If some of this is unclear, this topic of safety stock is covered in the operations management course, which is a prerequisite for this course. So you can always go back to your notes from that course, or you can reach me during office hours and I can go over this stuff again. Okay. Now, only one thing is left. Now we know that, so let's recap. We know safety stock is Z times SDL. Okay. Why do we need safety stock? Because we have to calculate average inventory level. And we know average inventory level is Q over 2 plus safety stock. So now we can expand that. We can plug this in here. So average inventory level is just going to be AIL is going to be Q over 2 plus Z times SDL. Okay. Z comes from the cycle service level. We use that Excel formula to figure out what the value of Z is. Most commonly, if the cycle service level is 95%, then we can use Z equals 1.65. So the Q comes from the ordering quantity, order batch size. So the only thing remaining in our way to calculate average inventory level is SDL. Okay, so let's see how do we calculate SDL. Okay. So demand during lead time, we know that the average demand during lead time is just D times L. Now, if you look at the variations around the average, okay, if we have constant daily demand and constant lead time, then SDL, the standard deviation of demand during lead time, is 0. If we have variable demand, but we have constant lead time. Constant lead time means our supplier always sends us our order and it gets transported to our facility in the same amount of time every time we place the order. It sounds a little bit unrealistic, but if, let's say, your lead time is always between 8.5 and 9.5 days, it's just, on the 9th day or end of the 8th day or beginning of the 9th day, you always get the order. Then because variability is so low, it's just a fraction of a day, you might just say, okay, I'm going to model it as constant of 9 days. Okay, because on the 9th day, whether it arrives at the end of the 8th day or the beginning of the 9th day, you can use that stock on the 9th day always, and you can never use it on the 8th day because it just arrives so late on the 8th day. So you're always using that stock on the 9th day anyway. So if you think your lead time is constant, then you can model, then the standard deviation of demand during lead time is going to be standard deviation of daily demand, SD, the standard deviation of small d, the daily demand, okay, multiplied by square root of the lead time L, which is the constant lead time. In the most realistic case where demand is variable and the lead time is also variable, then we get this formula for the SDL, where you first multiply the lead time by the square of the standard deviation of daily demand. Then you add to that the squared average daily demand multiplied by the squared standard deviation of the lead time. Notice that because lead time is now variable, it's going to have a standard deviation as well. Anything that is variable, you can calculate the standard deviation for it. And then we take a square root of the whole thing to get standard deviation of daily demand. So to calculate SDL, to complete our calculation of average inventory level, we need to figure out which situation we have. Do we have constant lead time, constant demand? Then we just plug in 0 for SDL, which makes safety stock go to 0. Or you have variable demand but constant lead time, where you use this formula for SDL, or you have variable demand, variable lead time, where you use this formula for SDL. So let's summarize this in a table. Safety stock is Z multiplied by SDL. SDL is standard deviation of demand during lead time. If you have fixed demand and fixed lead time, standard deviation is 0. If you have variable demand but fixed lead time, you use the standard deviation of the demand multiplied by square root of the lead time. If you have variable demand, variable lead time, then you use this formula where you use standard deviation of demand, you use standard deviation of lead time, you use average demand, and you use average lead time. Okay, so let's do a self-test. The answer is given in the notes section of this slide. So if you download the slides, you can view the notes for the slide, which gives you the correct answer. I encourage you to take a few moments to read the question and answer it, and then check your answer to see if you are with me. The question is, you're in a situation where demand and lead time are both constant. The ordering quantity, which is Q, is 48. What is the average inventory level? Okay, so let's look at our bakery example again. Okay, we have to calculate the inventory carrying costs, and we are not given the average inventory level. Instead, we're given other information. So the bakery orders bread in batches of 300 loaves. Whenever we order something from the supplier or we produce it in batches of certain quantity, that's going to be our batch size or ordering quantity Q. Okay, so just from the first line, I know that Q equals 300. The lead time is 4 days, and demand per day is 50 with a standard deviation of 20. So lead time of 4 days, that's your L. L equals 4. Okay, demand per day is 50. That's the small d. Small d equals 50. And standard deviation of 20 for the demand. That means S of D is 20. Now, where is S of L? We also need to know S of L. Well, if S of L is not given, that means we are assuming constant lead time. So S of L is just equal to 0 because this lead time is constant. So whenever the question does not give you standard deviation for lead time or for demand, we assume that the lead time or demand is constant. That's the way the question is indicating to you that this quantity is a constant, so there's no standard deviation associated with it. Because remember we said if something is constant, then there's no standard deviation for it. Inventory carrying costs are 40% or $0.4 per dollar per year. Another way to say that. And the landed cost, we should change this to landed cost because we're going to use landed cost later on as well. It's more accurate to talk about landed cost. And the landed cost of a loaf of bread is $2. Okay. What are the inventory carrying costs if management wants to maintain a 95% cycle service level? The cycle service level will be used because is useful because it tells us the Z value, and we know that for a 95% cycle service value, Z is simply 1.65 or 1.645 if you want to be more accurate. So let's solve this problem. So we're going to do this in 3 steps. Step 1, okay, we're going to calculate the standard deviation of demand during lead time. Step 2, we're going to calculate the average inventory level. And step 3, we're going to calculate the inventory carrying cost. So to do step 1, we first need to know which of the 3 situations we have. Are both lead time and demand, the small d demand, constant? No, because we have standard deviation for the small d demand, the daily demand. Are both lead time and daily demand variable? No, because we don't have standard deviation for the lead time, so lead time is fixed. So it's the second scenario where the formula for SDL is standard deviation of daily demand multiplied by square root of the lead time. So if we do that, standard deviation of daily demand is 20 multiplied by square root of the lead time, which is 4, gives us 40. Then then we have to calculate the average inventory level, which is Q over 2 plus safety stock. Okay, Q, remember, is 300. So say Q over 2 is just going to be 150, 300 divided by 2. And then safety stock is just going to be Z times SDL, or 1.65 times 40, which gives me 66. So I do 150 plus 66, or 216. That is my average inventory level. So on average in my bakery, I have 216 loaves of bread stored. Okay, so that's how much bread I carry on average. So inventory carrying cost is just going to be H, which is the carrying cost in dollars per year, times C, the landed cost of the bread, times average inventory level. Okay, this C is going to be the landed cost. H is 0.4, which is 40%, is $0.4 per dollar per year. Landed cost is $2. Average inventory level is 216. This gives me $172.8 per year of inventory carrying costs. Okay? So hopefully it may seem a little bit complicated at first, but if you are able to calculate SDL correctly, then the remaining part is relatively easy because average inventory level has a straightforward formula. It's Q over 2 plus Z times SDL. And then once you calculate average inventory level, you can calculate the inventory carrying cost. The trick to calculating SDL correctly is to know which of the three cases do you have. Do you have fixed demand and fixed lead time? Do you have variable demand, fixed lead time? Or do you have variable demand and variable lead time? Okay. Ordering costs. Ordering costs are also inventory costs, and these costs are proportional to how many orders are placed to replenish inventory. Before this, we talked about inventory carrying costs, which happen because you have to store the inventory somewhere, you have money invested in the inventory. This is a slightly different type of inventory costs because this cost occurs whenever you place an order. There's a cost to placing an order with a supplier. For example, you may have staff to create the purchase order, and so that would be their wages would be part of the ordering costs. You may have to deal with banking or financial institutions to pay the supplier, which may involve fees. For example, to open a letter of credit to deal with an international supplier, there's usually a fee to open a letter of credit. So those fees would be part of ordering costs. Any cost which is proportional to the number of orders placed is going to be part of the ordering costs. Usually an accountant would help a manager determine what the ordering costs are because they specialize in doing costing of various activities. So they'll say, you know, placing these orders, this is your cost per order, and then if you place, you know, however many orders, it's multiplied by however many orders you place. Okay. So calculating this cost is relatively straightforward. We are usually in this course, you'll always be provided with the number S, which is the fixed cost associated with placing one order. So if I am to place one order with a supplier, I spend S dollars, or the cost of that is S dollars. Now, the second thing we need to know is number of orders in a year. Okay, we can find that easily by looking at the annual demand, which is capital D. Capital D is annual demand. Okay. Well, how do we get annual demand? Well, if you know small d, you multiply it by 365 if you are open for business every day, or if you are open for business only maybe 320 days in a year, then it'll be small d times 320, right? So the question will usually give you the annual demand, and usually you'll divide it by the number of days you're open for business to get the daily demand. Or sometimes the question may give you the daily demand and it will tell you how many days of the year you're open for business, and you multiply daily demand by number of days on which you can sell something, and to get the annual demand, which is capital D. We divide the total or yearly demand, the annual demand, by the quantity that is ordered in one order. So if I place one order, I order Q units. Q is my ordering quantity. When I divide capital D by Q, the ordering quantity, I get how many orders I need to place in a year so that I can sell capital D units. Because if I am selling 1,000 units, I must place orders for 1,000 units, right? And if each order is for 200 units, then I need to place 5 of these orders over the whole year to be able to bring in 1,000 units, to be able to sell 1,000 units. Okay, so ordering cost in dollars per year, the annual ordering costs are simple to calculate. You multiply the fixed ordering cost S by the number of orders in a year, which is D over Q. Let's look at an example. So we're continuing the same example of the bakery with bread loaves. So we order in batches of 300, so Q equals 300. Okay, our daily demand is 50, so that's small d. Small d is 50. The store sells for 6 days a week. A fixed ordering cost of $5 is incurred on placing each order. So the fixed cost of $5 is S. This is S. So S equals $5. Okay. What is the annual ordering cost? Well, we don't have capital D, so step one, we're going to calculate the annual demand. Okay. So we have the daily demand. So we first figure out number of days in the year that we are open for. If we are open for 6 days a week, there are 52 weeks in a year. So 6 times 52 is how many days of the year we are open for business. Multiplied by small d, the daily demand would give us big D. And in this case, big D turns out to be 15,600 loaves of bread. Okay. And then we just plug big D into the annual ordering cost formula. We know S is $5 from the question. We know Q is 300. And when we solve, we get the annual ordering costs are $260 per year. So each year we must spend $260 just to be able to place the orders with our supplier. Out of stock costs. These costs happen when a customer wants to buy something from us, but we don't have the product in stock. Okay. So one of two things would happen. So a customer wants a product, okay, and we don't have it in stock. Okay. So two options that can happen, okay, when this condition or when this situation happens. First possible outcome is customer leaves. So the customer says, okay, I'll buy it from somewhere else, or I'll just not buy it because you don't have it in stock. I'm not going to wait for you to get more stock. We lose the sales. So this is called a lost sale. So we could have sold something if we had it in stock, but because we were out of stock, we lost a sale. Okay. The other thing that could happen is, okay, that the customer places a back. What happens is that the customer agrees to wait for a short amount of time, and he says, okay, I will wait if you can quickly get me that product. And so we place what's called a back order. So we tell our supplier or our supply chain or logistics people, hey, can you expedite some quantity of this product, because we have to satisfy a customer who's willing to wait, but not he or she is not willing to wait a lot. So back order cost could be the cost to expedite delivery. So maybe we have some units air shipped over. Maybe we pay the supplier a little bit extra to quickly produce some units for us, and so forth, right? So trying to expedite quantity for a customer has some back order costs. Okay. Now sometimes in some situations the customer may be willing to wait a lot of time. He's not really bothered about the time, which is rare. Usually customers want fast delivery, but let's say the customer is not bothered about the time. And so there's no expediting cost, but still you have to take down the customer order, and then when the stock arrives you have to call the customer. So there's still some management or tasks that have to happen to process this back order. So there's still going to be a little bit of back order cost because there's some processing costs to process the order. Okay. So what is the magnitude of the back order cost often depends on how long is the customer willing to wait on average, and it varies from context to context. Again, with the help of some accountants in your organization, you can figure out, what happens when you are out of stock. Well, maybe you figure out that, well, in your situation, customers almost always just leaves, so you have a lost sale. Or in another situation, you may find that, well, customer usually are willing to wait, but there is a back order processing cost, and maybe we have to expedite the delivery or whatever. Okay, so these costs are what we need to calculate. These are out of stock costs. Okay. Well, why are out of stocks part of inventory costs? Because the stock out, not having something in stock, is a function of our inventory policy. So inventory policy, for example, a part of inventory policy is the cycle service level that we talked about in safety stock. Inventory policy affects your out of stock situation. How often is it going to happen? Okay. So that is why these out of stock costs are part of inventory costs. So to calculate out of stock costs, we first have to figure out how many units are we expected to be out of stock by. Like how many units of lost sales or back orders are we going to have, okay, during our replenishment cycle, during the time, the lead time during which we can be out of stock. We've not received the next shipment from the supplier. Okay. So expected stock out units per order cycle are given by standard deviation of demand during lead time multiplied by this number called EZ. Okay. Well, what is the standard deviation of demand during lead time doing here? Well, just think about it. If there's a lot of variability in demand during lead time, then there's a higher chance that you're going to be out of stock because the demand during lead time could spike up suddenly. Okay. If the standard deviation of demand during lead time is small, then there's not a high chance that demand will just spike up, and you wouldn't have a lot of out of stock units. Okay. So SDL matters, and we already saw how to calculate SDL when we talked about inventory carrying costs. So the new thing is EZ. EZ is called the unit loss integral, okay, for the standard normal distribution, and we calculate EZ using the cycle service level. Okay, because the higher our cycle service level, the lower is the probability that we're going to be out of stock at all. Okay, so if our cycle service level is 99%, only 1% of the time are we going to be out of stock. Okay. However, if the cycle service level was only 90%, then 10% of the time will be out of stock. Okay. So how do we calculate easy? Easy is basically saying if your mean, if your standard deviation was just 1, then easy units is how many units you'll be out of stock by. Okay. So to calculate EZ, we can look it up in a table for a given Z value. The Z value comes from the cycle service level. Or we can plug in this formula in Excel. Okay. In this formula, Z will be the value of Z that comes from the cycle service level. So if CSL is 95%, then plug in 1.65 for Z in this formula. So whenever you see Z, you just type in 1.65. If the cycle service level is 99%, then you figure out the value of Z for that and you plug that in. So the formula is norm.s.dist for the Z value, and then you give it a false because you don't want the cumulative distribution. Then close brackets, then minus, then again you take the Z value multiplied by 1 minus, then again norm.s.dist. Then you give it Z, and now you give it the value true. You pass it the value true as the second argument because you want the cumulative probability in this case. Okay, and then you close brackets. So when you evaluate this whole formula in Excel, it will give you a value of EZ. Value of EZs are usually small, like 0.02, 0.04, because that's how many units you'll be out of stock by if your standard deviation was only 1. All right, in real life, standard deviation may be in tens or hundreds or thousands of units, and so when you multiply EZ by SDL, you'll get a larger number. Okay. So each time a unit is out of stock, it costs us K dollars. Now K will be given in the question. How do we figure out K? Again, I said you have to work with an accountant to figure out what percentage of customers walk away, what percentage place a back order. When people walk away, the cost of that is not zero because you have lost the ability to make some gross margin or gross profit on that sale. Let's say you sell something for $10 and your landed cost is $8, so you'll make $2 of profit. Each time there is a lost sale, you've lost those $2 of profit. Okay, so K could be $2 in that situation. Okay, if you have back ordering allowed, like customers are waiting and willing to wait and they do back orders, then K will be the cost of processing and managing that back order. In any case, we will not worry too much about how exactly to get to the value of K. We will assume K is given to us by an accountant or an analyst, and we're going to use K to figure out the out-of-stock costs. Okay. Now, remember that SDL times EZ was how many units we're going to be out of stock by in one ordering cycle. Well, we also know how many ordering cycles there are in a year. That's number of orders we place. If you remember the ordering cost calculation, how do we calculate annual ordering cost? We talked about how D over Q is the number of orders placed in a year. So we multiply number of orders placed in a year. This is number of orders placed. Okay, by how many units we are out of stock by. How many units we're out of stock by. Okay, when you multiply this number by this number, you get expected number of out of stock units for the whole year multiplied by K, the cost per out of stock unit, and you get the out of stock cost in dollars per year. Okay, so let's assume the bakery loses $1 each time a unit of bread is not sold due to being out of stock. There are no back orders allowed. The cycle service level is 95%, lead time is 4 days, daily demand is 50, standard deviation of daily demand is 20, bread is ordered in batches of 300, assume bakery is open 6 days a week. So we can get annual demand just like we did in the ordering cost calculation, and that's going to be 15,600 because you multiply the daily demand by number of days in a week you're open for business and by the number of weeks in the year. SDL is going to be standard deviation of daily demand multiplied by square root of lead time, because this is the situation where demand is variable but lead time is not. So SDL comes out to be 40. Okay. Z is 1.65 because the cycle service level is 95%. Okay, then we plug this into that Excel formula, and Excel tells us EZ has a value of 0.0206. So we plug everything into the out of stock formula. D over Q gives us the number of orders in a year, number of orders. K tells us the cost per unit we are out of stock, and how many units we're out of stock in an ordering cycle is 40 times EZ. This is SDL times EZ. When we solve the whole equation, we end up with an out of stock cost of $42.93 per year. Okay, so the last cost, inventory cost we're going to calculate, the last type of inventory cost is pipeline inventory cost. These are costs associated with inventory that is on its way to us. The supplier has shipped it, but it's not yet arrived in our facility. To calculate this cost, we have to understand the idea of landed cost. It's a pretty simple idea. Landed cost by definition is the total cost to get something to a desirable location. Okay. If we don't own that thing, we have to buy that thing, then we have to pay for transportation or shipping, maybe installation or unpackaging. All those costs added up, the cost to get something to a desirable location in a usable state is landed cost. The purpose of this course, we're going to look at only two components. So we pay something to the supplier, let's call that C naught. C naught is the price per unit, dollars per unit that we pay to the supplier. Okay, and then we have to get it shipped over to us. So maybe we pay R dollars per unit to get that those units shipped over to us. Maybe we fill up the whole truck with hundreds of units, and we pay the truck R dollars per unit. Okay, so that means when we receive those units, each unit is going to cost us at our facility C naught plus R, because that's how much money C naught plus R is, how much money we have spent to get that unit into our warehouse. So landed cost will be C naught plus R. The purchase price or the money paid to the supplier will be C naught, and then R would be the transportation expense. Each time a unit arrives at our location, it spends T, which is the number of days it takes to transport it, T divided by 365 fraction of a year in the pipeline, i.e. in transit. Pipeline and transit are words I will use interchangeably. So inventory is in transit is the same thing as inventory being in a pipeline. By pipeline, I don't mean literally in a pipe. Okay, it's not like a fuel pipeline, it just means it's in transit. So T is the in transit time during which we own the inventory. This is assuming we own the inventory on the way, which is the usual case. Usually a supplier makes goods available at the doorstep of his her factory, and then the transportation company insures the goods, but they when they pick them up, they are in our ownership. So if a disaster or a natural disaster happens and all those goods are destroyed, we still have to pay the supplier because he handed over the goods to the shipping company, and so the supplier is not liable because we were owning the goods in transit. However, in sometimes the terms of trade or the sales agreement with the supplier is such that the supplier owns the goods in transit. For those products for which the supplier owns the good during transit, and we only become the owner, and hence we take the risk or liability, we take the risk of damage or whatever only when we receive them in the factory. That's when we become the owner. Before that, we are not the owner of those goods. Then we will not, then the pipeline cost, inventory cost will be zero, because if you don't own something, it's not going to be on your books, accounting books, um, and and so you don't incur the pipeline inventory cost. The usual case is that the buyer does own the goods in transit, and so the buyer has to calculate the inventory pipeline or transit inventory costs. Okay, so the formula for pipeline inventory cost is kind of similar to the carrying cost formula. We have the same H that we have in the carrying cost, but instead of C, remember we had HC AIL, that was inventory carrying costs. Okay, that was inventory carrying costs. So we have the same H. Instead of C, we have C naught. Well, C was the landed cost where we included the transportation rate. C naught includes just the money we pay the supplier. It does not include the transportation expense. Okay. Why? Because when inventory is in transit, the value of that inventory is C naught. Only after reaching our warehouse does the value of the inventory increase to C naught plus R. And then we multiply by how many units are in transit. If every unit is in transit for T over 365 fraction of the time, then on average T over 365 multiplied by annual demand, that's how many units will be in transit on average. Notice that we divide by 365. We are not worried about how many days is our business open, because even if our business is closed, it's a Saturday or Sunday, the ship is not going to stop moving in the ocean just because we have a holiday, or the truck is not, or the train or truck are not going to stop moving. So the other thing we have to be careful about is that the small t is transit time, which is not the same thing as lead time. If we start the stopwatch when we place an order with the supplier, then when we receive the order, that total time is lead time. But when we place an order with the supplier does not ship right away. Maybe he spends 2 or 3 days producing or packaging that product. And once the supplier ships it, that's when the small t time starts, the transit time. Transit time is exactly the time when the product ships from the supplier and arrives at our facility. That's the transit time. Okay. Remember, landed cost is the purchase cost that we pay the supplier plus the transportation rate. That is the landed cost. So let's look at the total inventory costs. We talk about 4 types of costs. Let's see the total inventory cost equation. So if I club all those costs into one formula, I get total inventory cost. This is going to be dollars per year. This is an annual cost. Okay. The total inventory cost in dollars per year is going to be given by D over Q multiplied by S plus HC multiplied by Q over 2 plus ZSDL. This, as you can see, is average inventory level, right? D over Q is number of orders we'll place in a year. So this is the first part is the ordering cost, and you have the inventory carrying cost. Then we have the stock out cost, where again you have number of orders we place in a year, right? And then we have the pipeline or in transit cost. So the first block right there is the ordering cost. The second block right there is the carrying cost. The third block right there is the out of stock cost. And the fourth block is pipeline inventory costs. Okay, so that is our total inventory cost equation. Now, why did we go through so much hassle to develop this equation, and then we can use it to calculate total inventory cost per year? Because we are studying logistics. Why are we worried about these inventory costs? Okay. Look at this formula and think about what are some of the logistics decisions which can impact the quantities in this formula. Okay, so let's say we choose a transportation carrier or medium. We say, okay, we're going to transport our goods by ship or rail or truck or whatever. So our transportation decisions choose R, right? The transportation expense per unit. It's dollars per unit we spend to transport that from supplier to our facility. Okay, well, where does R go up? Well, R is going to determine what C, the landed cost, is, because landed cost is C naught plus R. Well, where does landed cost show up? Here. Okay, there's landed cost. So our transportation decisions directly influence carrying cost. Okay, then we may decide to ship in a rail car or a truck, which might limit or modify our ordering quantity Q, because ordering quantity Q we can try to optimize it, but sometimes if it means shipping 1.5 or 1.25 containers, it's usually cheaper to just ship 1 or 2 containers, because container loads or truck loads tend to be cheaper than doing a partial container or partial truckload. Okay. So transportation decisions also impact Q. Well, where does Q show up? It shows up in ordering costs. Okay, let me use a different color. So first, transportation decisions impact this C. Then they impact the Q here, the Q there, the Q there, right? So our transportation decisions are impacting ordering cost, carrying cost, and out of stock cost. Then, depending on which mode of transportation we choose and which carrier we choose, which determines this R, that also determines the transit time, because truck might be faster than rail, air might be faster than truck, right? So the transit time T is also impacted by transportation decisions. So pipeline inventory costs are also impacted by transportation decisions. Okay. Then when we the lead time includes in it the transit time as well, because lead time is time between placing an order and receiving the goods. So part of lead time is the time taken by supplier to get the order ready, but part of lead time is also the transit time T. So transportation decisions impact T, which means they impact lead time L, and L impacts SDL. Well, where does SDL show up? SDL is here, SDL is here. Okay, so you can see that transportation decisions impact ordering cost, carrying cost, out of stock cost, pipeline inventory cost. So transportation decisions have a very strong direct influence on total inventory costs, which is why we went through all this hassle, because when we are taking our transportation decisions, we can calculate the impact of those decisions on our inventory cost and take a holistic perspective to logistics decisions and not just focus on a small piece of them like just the transportation cost and so forth. So in the bakery example, let's calculate all of our data, okay, into one slide. So you've seen this data before, the daily demand, standard deviation, capital D, right? So let's look at the total inventory cost in dollars per year. So we calculated this in the example on ordering cost. We calculated this already in carrying cost. We calculate this in out of stock cost. In this question, our pipeline inventory cost is 0 because our terms of trade with our supplier, the question would tell you this, right? It will tell you the terms of trade say that, the supplier owns the goods in transit. If the supplier owns the good in transit, then pipeline inventory cost for us will be 0. Instead, the pipeline inventory cost will show up on the supplier side. The supplier will bear those costs because it will be supplier's inventory. Okay. Usually the question will not say that the goods are owned by the supplier in transit, because the default or usual case in real life is that the buyer owns the goods in transit. And so we'll have to calculate the pipeline inventory cost. You just plug into the formula. We have all the values. We have H, we know C naught. The question tells us C naught. We know the transit time, and so we can calculate the pipeline inventory cost easily if we had to. Then we add all of them up. So the total inventory cost in dollars per year of our bread or loaves of bread is $475.73. Let's do another self-test question. Okay? So if this seems a bit tricky or you don't know what it's talking about, go back and review the slides which talk about SDL. Okay, because SDL is part of safety stock. Okay, and the question is about safety stock. So let's say the average daily demand D increases while all else, including variance in daily demand, remains exactly the same. So SD is the same, not changed, right? Lead time is not changed, SL is not changed, and so forth. Q is not changed, right? And so forth. And nothing else has changed. The only thing that changes is that small d goes up, daily demand increases. What will happen to safety stock? Will safety stock go up? Will safety stock go down? Will it remain the same? Or it's contingent, it depends, which is the fourth option, that safety stock increases if lead time is variable, but it stays the same if lead time is constant. So that is an answer which depends on what's happening with lead time. And then E is the choice that it cannot be determined with the information given. We're not given enough information. Again, the answer is in the notes part of the slide. So if you've downloaded the slides, you can go to the slide, look at the notes section to check your answer.